I'll never forget the first evening we turned the key in that front door. The late Arizona sun streamed through the living room blinds, casting long golden streaks across the hardwood floor and illuminating a swirl of dust motes that danced in the air like tiny fireflies. It was a scene so serene, it could have been plucked from a painting. Quiet, warm, and brimming with promise. My husband, Jim, and I stood there for a heartbeat, shoulder to shoulder, taking it in. The blank canvas of a space waiting to be filled with our furniture, our laughter, our lives. After decades of relentless effort, me as a high school librarian buried in overdue books and lesson plans, him in customer service management, soothing irate clients and clocking overtime, we'd scrimped and saved every penny for this, our golden years. We dreamed of a place where we could trade the clamor of raising kids and juggling careers for slow mornings with coffee on the patio, evenings steeped in the scent of blooming desert flowers. This small suburb just outside Tucson seemed to deliver on every count. Neat sidewalks edged with gravel, friendly waves from strangers as we'd pulled up in the moving truck, palm trees lining the entrance like a tropical guard of honor, and a community newsletter tucked into the mailbox that boasted potluck dinners, charity bake sales, and neighborly spirit. It was everything we'd envisioned, an uncomplicated piece to cap off a life well lived. And yet, if I'm being honest, there was a faint flutter of unease in my chest the moment we stepped out of that truck onto the sun-warmed pavement. Maybe it was the way the hush draped over the street, heavier than I'd expected for a balmy evening, or how a couple of curtains twitched at the windows across the road, like cautious eyes blinking awake. It wasn't anything outright menacing, just a feeling, subtle and nagging, like stepping into a room where the rules were etched into the walls and known to everyone but us. I chalked it up to the jitters of a new beginning. New places always carry a whiff of the unfamiliar, don't they? We were the newcomers, eager to fit in, to carve out our spot and make a good impression. So, I shrugged it off, burying the sensation beneath the bustle of moving day. We spent hours lugging furniture inside, Jim grunting as he wrestled the old leather couch through the narrow doorway, me unwrapping plates from crinkled newspaper, debating which boxes demanded immediate attention and which could linger until tomorrow. Our golden retriever, Sophie, was in her element, darting around the backyard with her tail wagging like a metronome cranked to maximum speed. She sniffed every nook and cranny, her paws kicking up little puffs of dry earth as she mapped her new kingdom. We got so swept up in that fresh home excitement, laughing at Sophie's antics, marveling at how the late light gilded the kitchen tiles, that I almost forgot the unease entirely. By morning, the sense of promise roared back, full force. A soft breeze ruffled the curtains, carrying the gentle hum of sprinklers from somewhere down the block, and the faint chirp of desert birds. I threw the windows wide, letting the crisp air flood in, and we settled at the kitchen table for breakfast. Toast slathered with homemade strawberry jam, our granddaughter Ellie had given us as a moving gift. The jar still bore her sticky note, scrawled in her loopy 8-year-old handwriting for Grandma and Grandpa. It was perfect, simple, sweet, a taste of family tethering us to this new chapter. Over coffee, we started a list of small projects. Touch-up painting on the baseboards where the movers had scuffed them, a new set of house numbers for the curb, maybe a birdhouse for the gnarled mesquite tree out back. Just the sort of personal touches that transform a house into a home. We'd barely begun painting a planter box out front, me in my faded denim shirt, Jim with a streak of white paint smeared across his cheek like a badge of honor, when she appeared across the street like a mirage shimmering in pastel. At first, I assumed she was a neighbor, the kind who might wave hello, or even shuffle over with a plate of cookies as a welcome gesture. She was older, maybe late 60s, with a short bob of silver hair that caught the sunlight and a floral blouse that seemed to ripple as she stood there. But she didn't wave. She just planted herself on the sidewalk, arms crossed, hip jutted out, her eyes scanning our house as though searching for a crack in its stucco facade. It was our first glimpse of Carol, though we didn't know her name yet. She raised her hand and pointed a single rigid finger at something near our garage door. Then, in a tone that carried clear across the street without her raising her voice, an impressive trick I'd later come to recognize as her signature, she said, "You know you can't keep your recyclables out past Monday evening." No greeting, no introduction, just that crisp, matter-of-fact declaration, sharp as a ruler's edge. We froze, caught off guard. Our recycling bin sat near the curb, a forgotten relic from the chaos of moving in the day before. It was Tuesday morning, and we hadn't even thought to check the pickup schedule, hadn't had a spare second to breathe, let alone study trash etiquette. Before we could stammer out a response, an apology, an explanation, anything, she spun on her heel and marched back into her house, the screen door slapping shut behind her with a decisive thwack. Jim and I exchanged puzzled looks, unsure whether to laugh it off as quirky or worry we'd already tripped over some invisible line. It seemed so trivial, surely just a misunderstanding, a hiccup in our first day. We wheeled the bin up the driveway, its wheels rattling over the concrete, and gave each other a little shrug. "Guess we've got a stickler on our hands," Jim said with a chuckle, brushing paint off his hands onto his jeans. I forced a smile, but something about her tone lingered in my mind, cold and unyielding, like a warning shot fired over the bow. That evening, as we settled into bed, I found myself replaying the moment in my head. The way Carol had looked at us, like she'd spotted fresh prey, put me on edge in a way I couldn't shake. I'd grown up in a tight-knit Midwest town where neighbors looked out for each other with a smile, not a glare. If someone had a problem, they'd knock on your door with a plate of brownies and a gentle nudge. "Hey, your grass is getting a bit wild. Need a hand?" Not snipe at you from across the street like a schoolmarm scolding a tardy student. Jim patted my hand under the covers, his calloused fingers warm against mine, and reminded me why we'd chosen this place. Good schools. Not that we needed them anymore, but it meant solid property values, manicured streets that gleamed in the desert sun, and a robust homeowners association that promised to keep everything running like a well-oiled machine. "She's probably just some overzealous volunteer," he said, his voice thick with sleep but steady as ever. The self-appointed welcome wagon with a clipboard and a chip on her shoulder. "Give it a few days, Ellen. She'll find someone else to fuss over." With that, I pushed the worry aside and drifted off, hoping for a deep, dreamless sleep in our new bed, the faint scent of fresh paint still lingering in the air. The next day brought more of the same, only sharper and more insistent. We'd barely started trimming the overgrown shrub by our front window, Sophie nosing around the clippings, her tail thumping against the ground, when Carol materialized on the sidewalk, like a specter summoned by our shears. She wore the same floral blouse, arms folded tightly across her chest, lips pressed into a thin, disapproving line. She gestured to the small pile of trimmings we hadn't yet bagged up, her mouth moving in clipped sentences I couldn't quite catch over the rhythmic snip-snip of Jim's shears. Her expression radiated disapproval, as though we'd committed some cardinal sin against the neighborhood's sanctity. By lunchtime, we found an envelope slipped under our doormat. An official letter from the Homeowners Association, typed on crisp letterhead with an embossed logo, requesting we abide by landscaping guidelines. "Please ensure all trimmings are promptly bagged and removed," it read, followed by a vague nod to maintaining community standards as outlined in Section 4.2. Already? We'd been here less than 48 hours. It felt like a practical joke, or a test we hadn't studied for. I couldn't help but wonder, who has the time or energy to lodge a complaint this fast? The handwriting on the envelope, a tidy, looped scrawl, looked suspiciously like it belonged to an older woman determined to make a point. Someone with a fountain pen and too much free time. We complied, of course. We had no intention of rocking the boat, not when we'd just dropped anchor. We wanted an easy, peaceful retirement, not a turf war over twigs and recycling bins. Jim hauled the trimmings to the compost pile out back, muttering under his breath about overzealous busybodies, while I swept the sidewalk clean, Sophie trotting beside me with a stick clamped in her jaws like a prize. But that uneasy pit in my stomach kept growing, a stubborn weed taking root. Neighbors passed by as we worked, offering polite nods or a quick, "Nice day, isn't it?" But none lingered to chat. None offered the warm introductions I'd hoped for after years of imagining this move. A few times, I caught curtains fluttering again, someone peeking out, then vanishing as soon as I turned my head. It was as though we were the unwitting stars of a new soap opera in a place that prided itself on predictability and polish. I found myself missing our old neighborhood in Ohio, where folks could be a little rough around the edges. Lawnmowers left out in the rain, kids' bikes scattered across driveways like forgotten toys, but always quick to offer a helping hand, a cold beer on a hot day, or a shouted, "How's it going?" across the fence. A week in, Carol's scrutiny shifted into overdrive, and the unease blossomed into something closer to dread. I'd catch her on her porch at odd hours, early morning with the sun barely up, late afternoon as shadows stretched long, phone in hand, snapping pictures of our front yard like a private investigator on a stakeout. Once, I stepped out in my robe to grab the newspaper, hair a tangled mess, coffee mug still steaming in my hand, and heard that unmistakable click from across the street. It was unnerving, invasive, and more than a little insulting. Who photographs someone in their bathrobe at 7 a.m., half awake and vulnerable? I confided in Jim over dinner that night, pushing my mashed potatoes around my plate as my voice tightened with frustration. He tried to reassure me, his calm demeanor a balm as always, honed by years of diffusing angry customers. "It's just part of adjusting to a new place," he said, spearing a piece of chicken with his fork. "She might be lonely, or maybe she's got nothing better to do than play neighborhood cop with a smartphone. Keep your cool, Ellen. Give it a month or two. She'll ease up once she sees we're not here to trash the joint." I wanted to believe him, to cling to his steady optimism, but my gut screamed otherwise. Carol wasn't sizing us up to befriend us. She was marking her territory, staking a claim we hadn't even known was up for grabs. She didn't ease up. Over the next few days, small, bizarre offenses piled up like junk mail in an overflowing mailbox. An incorrectly positioned mailbox flag. It was up when it should have been down, apparently a signal for mail we didn't intend. A paint swatch for our front door that was too vibrant. A soft sage green we'd thought was neutral, even soothing. Even the length of Sophie's leash when we walked her around the block, 6 feet instead of 5, per some obscure rule buried in fine print. A second letter arrived, this one thicker, citing multiple infractions ranging from unsightly yard decor to excessive porch lighting after 10 p.m. Jim scoffed as he read it aloud, his glasses perched low on his nose, fogging slightly from the steam of his coffee. We'd hung a single, modest wind chime near the door, a gift from our son Michael, with a tinkling melody that reminded us of him, and the porch lights were on a basic timer, hardly a Las Vegas marquee blazing through the night. "This is ridiculous," he muttered, tossing the letter onto the counter with a flick of his wrist. What's next? A fine for breathing too loudly? For Sophie wagging her tail too enthusiastically? The real kicker came when we got chatting with Ted, our easygoing next-door neighbor, over the fence one lazy Saturday afternoon. He was a wiry guy in his late 50s, always in a faded baseball cap pulled low over his eyes, tending to his cactus garden with a quiet pride that bordered on reverence. As we swapped small talk, weather, moving woes, Sophie's love of chasing lizards across the yard, he let slip a bombshell that stopped me cold. Carol wasn't just a nosy neighbor. She was on the HOA board, or at least deeply entwined with it. She attended every meeting, chaired some committee or another. Ted couldn't recall which, just that it gave her clout, and had been instrumental in pushing for stricter guidelines over the past few years, tightening the screws on what had once been a looser, friendlier community. "She's got a reputation," Ted said, leaning on his rake, his voice low as if she might overhear from across the street. "Likes to break in the newbies, especially if you seem too laid back for her taste." A few folks have tried to push back, called her out at meetings, filed their own complaints, but most either move out or give in. She's relentless, like a dog with a bone. He paused, then added with a wry grin that didn't reach his eyes, "Welcome to paradise, huh? Hope you brought your armor." I tried to hold on to perspective, to keep my footing amid the rising tide of unease. We were newly retired, living in a desert oasis with stucco homes and mountain views that took my breath away each morning. This was supposed to be the good part of life, where you finally exhale, pick up hobbies you'd shelved for decades, spoil your grandkids when they tumble through the door. Our daughter, Sarah, was already planning to drive down from Phoenix with Ellie and little Max in a few weeks, their suitcases stuffed with swimsuits and excitement. I pictured barbecues by the pool, Sophie splashing after tennis balls with her goofy grin, the kids' laughter echoing off the patio stones. And yet each morning, I woke up with a knot of anxiety twisting in my gut, peeking out the window to see if Carol was prowling, phone at the ready like a loaded weapon. Jim suggested we meet her head-on, invite her over for coffee or dinner, show her we were nice, normal people, maybe smooth out the tension with a slice of pie and some small talk. "Kill her with kindness," he said with a wink, his hazel eyes crinkling at the corners. But my instinct screamed otherwise, loud and insistent. Carol didn't want friendship. She didn't strike me as the pie-sharing type. She thrived on control, on friction, on the power she wielded with every click of her camera and every letter slid under our door. The more she could push, the more she seemed to feed off it. A predator circling a fresh kill. When the third letter arrived, I felt my temper snap like a dry twig underfoot. It was about our back gate. Visible from the street, apparently, and not the precise shade of beige mandated by some arcane subsection of the rules. The letter threatened a fine, detailing in officious prose how such gates must meet specific color and height standards to preserve the aesthetic integrity of the community. I stood in the kitchen, clutching the paper so tightly it crinkled, my hands trembling with a volatile mix of anger and heartbreak. Why would anyone go to such lengths over something so trivial, so utterly inconsequential? I called the HOA number listed at the bottom, hoping to speak with someone reasonable, someone who'd hear me out and see the absurdity of it all. But the automated system led me in maddening circles. Press 1 for maintenance, 2 for billing, 3 for complaints, only to dump me into a voicemail abyss. No matter which extension I tried, no one picked up. No human voice broke through the robotic drone. It felt like a deliberate wall, a fortress designed to keep residents at bay, while the complaints piled up like unpaid bills. We were at a crossroads, teetering on the edge of a decision that felt bigger than it should have. We could lay low, keep our heads down, and hope Carol's hawk-like gaze shifted to some other poor soul. Or we could push back. And pushing back felt daunting, even exhausting. Did we really want to spend our retirement locked in an HOA feud, trading barbecues for bylaws and peace for paperwork? But this was our home. We'd poured our savings into it, dreamed of it for years through late nights at work and lean months when the kids' college funds took priority. We weren't about to let a self-appointed vigilante drive us out, chasing us back to the familiar but uninspired streets of Ohio. So we resolved to fight smart, to keep meticulous records of every interaction, every letter, every photograph she took. If we had to face the HOA head-on, we'd come armed with evidence, a paper trail to match her own. We had no idea, though, just how far Carol was willing to escalate, how deep her roots ran in this manicured desert soil. Amid the mounting tension, I clung to the sweeter moments like lifelines. Sarah brought the kids down one weekend, and we threw a barbecue in the backyard that felt like a slice of the life we'd envisioned. The pool sparkled under the relentless sun, Ellie and Max squealing as they cannonballed in, sending arcs of water over the edge. Sophie barked joyfully, chasing a soggy tennis ball with her tongue lolling out, while Jim manned the grill, flipping burgers in a goofy apron emblazoned with Grill Master that Max had picked out for him last Father's Day. I sipped lemonade from a mason jar, the ice clinking against the glass, and watched the chaos unfold. Ellie's freckled face scrunched in laughter, Max's wild curls bouncing as he raced Sophie across the yard. For a few precious hours, I forgot about Carol's prying eyes, lost in the simple joy of family. It was exactly the memory I'd pictured when we signed the papers, a snapshot of bliss in our new life. But then I glanced over the fence and saw her silhouette across the street, half hidden behind a thorny rosebush. Phone raised. Snap. The moment soured, tainted by her intrusion, a dark smudge on a perfect canvas. Jim caught my eye from the grill, his spatula pausing mid-flip, and nodded grimly. We couldn't let her keep chipping away at our peace, not when we'd worked so hard to earn it. No matter the cost, we had to fight back. The next morning, we headed to Desert Brew, the local coffee shop, to strategize over steaming mugs and the hum of quiet conversation. It was a cozy spot, adorned with southwestern art. Woven rugs in earthy reds and blues hung on the walls. Clay pots lined the shelves, and run by a friendly couple, Marla and Pete, who'd lived in the area for 20 years and knew every face that walked through the door. Marla poured our coffee with a smile, asking how we were settling in, while Pete tossed a rag over his shoulder and chimed in with a story about their own move decades ago. Over the rich, dark brew, we hashed out a plan. First, we dig into the HOA bylaws ourselves, wade through the legalese to see what we were actually up against. Second, we'd talk to more neighbors, gauge if Carol's reign of terror was as widespread as Ted hinted, and build a coalition if we could. Third, if it came to it, we'd take our case to the next HOA meeting, armed with facts and a united front. But we wanted evidence first. Hard, irrefutable proof. Carol couldn't target us without leaving a trail, and we suspected we weren't her first victims, just the latest in a long line. Ted proved invaluable in our early reconnaissance, a steady ally in a sea of uncertainty. He came over that afternoon, sipping iced tea in our living room while flipping through the growing file of letters we'd received, his cap tilted back to reveal a furrowed brow. He shook his head, incredulous even now as he recounted his own run-in with Carol. "She fined me once for a bird feeder," he said, his voice rough with lingering resentment. "A little wooden thing I hung in the oak out front. Said it attracted too many pests. Pigeons, I guess. Paid it just to shut her up, but it still stings, you know? $50 for a handful of birds." Another neighbor, Ms. Delgado, a spry widow with a penchant for bright scarves and a sharp tongue, stopped by later with her own tale, her hands fluttering as she spoke. She'd received a citation for potted geraniums on her driveway, a splash of red she'd thought brightened the place. Carol had deemed them a clash with the community aesthetic, and the fine had followed swift as a hawk's strike. Then there were the Wilsons, who'd lived at the end of the block until last year. Ted said they'd sold their place after Carol hounded them over everything, from their kids' chalk drawings on the sidewalk, smudged rainbows and hopscotch grids, to the height of their mailbox, which she claimed was a quarter-inch too tall. Worn down by the relentless barrage, they'd packed up and left, their for sale sign a white flag of surrender. Armed with these stories, our resolve hardened like clay in the desert sun. I downloaded the HOA handbook from its clunky website, a 47-page beast stuffed with rules on lawn care, approved paint palettes, mailbox specifications, fence heights, and more. My eyes glazed over by page 3, the dense text swimming before me, but I slogged through, highlighter in hand, fueled by coffee and determination. There were vague clauses about maintaining neighborhood harmony and preventing nuisances that detract from property values, giving board members and busybodies like Carol wide latitude to interpret as they pleased. She was wielding that ambiguity like a club, swinging it with precision. But we found no mention of wind chimes or gate colors in the labyrinth of text. She was either inventing violations wholesale or stretching the rules beyond any reasonable reading. That was our opening, a chink in her armor we could pry apart. Next, we prepped for the monthly HOA open forum, set for the following Wednesday at the clubhouse by the park. A squat building with a red-tiled roof and a bulletin board plastered with flyers. We'd never attended anything like it. Our old neighborhood in Ohio didn't even have an HOA, just a loose agreement to keep the peace. But we decided to draft a statement, compile the contradictory letters, and request a formal review of Carol's actions. Over the next few days, we worked at the kitchen table, jotting bullet points on legal pads and printing photos of our yard. Ordinary snapshots of neatly trimmed shrubs and a swept walkway, proof we weren't the blight Carol painted us as. I even caught her in the act once, snapping a picture of her snapping us, which felt absurd but oddly satisfying. She'd been lurking by her mailbox, pretending to adjust it while aiming her phone at our porch, her lips pursed in concentration. I zoomed in with my own camera, capturing the glint of sunlight off her silver hair, and added it to our growing dossier. Carol didn't let up in the meantime, her campaign relentless as a desert wind. Another letter arrived, this one claiming we'd violated an early holiday decorations rule. The holiday in question, Thanksgiving, was 6 weeks away, and we hadn't hung so much as a wreath or a pumpkin garland. I laughed out loud when I read it, a sharp, bitter sound that echoed off the kitchen tiles. "She's losing it," I told Jim, waving the paper like a flag of surrender. "Just throwing nonsense at us now, seeing what sticks." But the fine threat at the bottom, $50, due in 10 days, wiped the humor away, replacing it with a slow burn of outrage. It was absurd, yes, but calculated, a barrage designed to overwhelm us with petty complaints until we broke or bolted. Instead of buckling, we posted a note on the clubhouse bulletin board, a simple plea typed in bold. "If you've experienced unwarranted HOA complaints, please contact us. You're not alone." The response stunned us. Emails pinged into my inbox, the phone rang off the hook, and a few neighbors even dropped by with hesitant knocks. Some were timid, fearing Carol's wrath if they spoke out. Others were furious, eager to vent years of pent-up frustration. Ms. Delgado brought a file of her own, thick with citations dating back 3 years. Geraniums, a birdbath she'd installed for her late husband, a flag she'd flown on Veterans Day that Carol deemed too large. Slowly, we built a timeline of Carol's antics. New family moves in. She starts with a thin smile and a wave, then pounces on minor infractions, escalating until they conform to her exacting standards or flee. Some even paid hefty fines, $100, $200, that fattened the HOA's coffers, funding new benches or a fountain no one had asked for. One name surfaced repeatedly in these whispered conversations: Cynthia Pearson, the HOA president. Neighbors described her as fair-minded, but worn thin by Carol's constant stirring, a woman caught between duty and exhaustion. She'd tried to rein Carol in, they said, called her out in private, suggested she ease off. But Carol had allies on the board, a clique of loyalists who either enjoyed the power trip or simply didn't care to resist. It was a tangled mess, the kind of petty politics I'd hoped to escape entirely by retiring to a well-run community where the biggest debate might be whose turn it was to host the potluck. We decided to appeal to Cynthia directly, to bypass Carol's web and reach someone who might listen. We wrote a polite letter outlining our ordeal, attaching copies of Carol's baseless complaints, and noting we weren't alone. Others had come forward, their stories mirroring ours. We kept it diplomatic, avoiding accusations, just laying out the facts in black and white. Then we slipped it under her door one evening, a quiet street lit by the soft glow of porch lights, hoping she'd read it before Carol could spin her own version. Doubt gnawed at me as we waited, a persistent whisper in the back of my mind. Could we really challenge someone so entrenched, so practiced in her petty tyranny? Carol thrived on intimidation. She'd had years to hone it, to perfect the art of making people squirm. Jim, ever the optimist, reminded me that bullies count on silence, on fear or fatigue winning out. She's only got power if we let her keep it, he said, squeezing my shoulder with a firmness that anchored me. We didn't come this far to roll over, Ellen. This is our home. He was right. I knew it in my bones. If we didn't stand up, who would? This was our dream, hard-earned and fiercely loved, and we'd be damned if we let her dismantle it piece by petty piece. The morning of the HOA forum dawned crisp and clear, a desert breeze rustling the palms and tugging at the edges of my nerves. My stomach churned as we rehearsed our statement one last time over breakfast, the words blurring on the page. Ted agreed to join us for moral support, his quiet presence a steadying force, and Ms. Delgado promised to speak if called on, her scarf knotted with resolve. We aimed to prove this wasn't just about us. It was a pattern, a web of harassment with Carol at its center. Walking to the clubhouse, I felt my pulse quicken, a drumbeat in my chest. A dozen residents milled outside, some clutching folders stuffed with papers, others whispering in tight knots under the shade of a creosote bush. A few nodded sympathetically as we passed. Others avoided our gaze, their eyes darting to the ground. Lines were drawn before we even stepped through the door, the air thick with unspoken alliances. The room was modest but functional, rows of folding chairs arranged in neat lines, a low podium at the front, a long table stretched across the head of the space for the board. Carol sat there in her pastel blouse, lips pursed in perpetual disapproval, her silver hair catching the fluorescent light. Cynthia, trim and silver-haired herself, sat beside her, offering a warm smile that eased my nerves just enough to keep my hands from shaking. Other board members, a balding man named Roger, a woman with a tight bun whose name I couldn't recall, fiddled with papers or stared at their phones, avoiding the tension that crackled in the air like static before a storm. Jim squeezed my hand as we took our seats near the front, Sophie's absence a quiet ache at my side. She'd stayed home, sprawled on her bed by the patio door. The meeting began with routine business. Budget updates droned in monotone, a leaky sprinkler fix debated for 10 minutes too long. Before Cynthia opened the floor for resident concerns, her voice steady, but tinged with weariness. I stood, my legs wobbly as jelly, and cleared my throat, the sound loud in the hushed room. I'm Ellen. This is my husband, Jim. We're new here, and we love this community, or we want to. We moved here for peace, for a fresh start. But we've been hit with repeated, unfounded complaints since the day we arrived. I avoided naming Carol at first, focusing on fairness, on the need for rules to be applied uniformly, not wielded as weapons. My voice trembled, but grew stronger as I went, fueled by the weight of our story. Ms. Delgado rose next, her scarf a splash of red against the beige walls, backing us up with her own tale of geraniums and petty fines. That's when Carol pounced. Leaning into her mic, her voice oozed condescension, sharp and syrupy all at once. "These newcomers don't appreciate our standards," she said, rattling off citations like a prosecutor in a courtroom drama, recycling bins, trimmings, wind chimes, the works. But her smugness faltered as Moore stood, Ted with his bird feeder saga, a young dad from down the street whose son's basketball hoop had sparked a month-long battle, an older couple by the park who'd been fined for a patio umbrella Carol deemed garish. Murmurs rippled through the crowd, a low hum of recognition. I took a deep breath and pulled out our evidence. Photos of our tidy yard, the bathrobe shot, which drew chuckles from the back, a small balm to my nerves, letters from absent neighbors who'd sent their own accounts via email. Carol tried to interrupt, her voice cutting through like a blade. "That's irrelevant, they're exaggerating." But Cynthia silenced her with a raised hand, a firm, "Let her finish," that felt like a lifeline. Then Ted dropped the bombshell, a thick stack of papers he'd spent nights compiling, old newsletters, archived letters, printouts from the HOA's website, all chronicling 2 years of Carol's complaints. It was damning. The same accusations, the same fear tactics, always aimed at new families or those who dared to question her. The reaction among the board members ranged from shock, Roger's mouth hung open, to weary resignation, as if they'd known but hadn't acted. Cynthia, steely now, promised a thorough internal review, her pen tapping the table with resolve. Carol's composure cracked like thin ice. She accused us of banding together in a smear campaign, claimed the photos were doctored, demanded immediate fines for breaching confidentiality by airing it all in a public forum. Her voice rose, shrill and unsteady, but the room had turned. Her bluster rang hollow, a desperate flail against a tide she couldn't stem. People weren't buying it anymore. We'd exposed her pattern, her pettiness, her manipulation. For once, it was she who looked cornered, not us. Her allies on the board shifting uncomfortably in their seats. Cynthia wrapped up the discussion, vowing to address it in executive session and communicate their findings within the week. She thanked us for bringing the matter forward, her tone firm but kind, and asked if anyone had anything else to add. Carol remained seated, arms crossed, muttering under her breath, something about ingrates and standards, while Roger and the bun lady exchanged pointed looks that suggested a reckoning was brewing. When the meeting ended, the crowd lingered, a buzz of conversation filling the space. Neighbors approached us, Ms. Delgado with a fierce nod, the young dad with a quiet, "Thank you," an older woman I didn't know who pressed my hand and whispered, "It's about time." We left with cautious hope, triumph tempered by wariness, a fragile ember we didn't dare fan too hard. Carol wouldn't go quietly. Her glare as we filed out promised as much. But Ted overheard Roger mutter to Cynthia about reviewing Carol's position, maybe even limiting her authority. And that was enough to lighten our steps on the walk home. We'd taken a stand, and it felt good. Better than I'd expected for 2 retirees who'd spent their lives avoiding conflict, smoothing edges rather than sharpening them. In my librarian days, I'd calmed feuding teens over dog-eared books. Jim had talked down furious clients over billing errors. We were peacemakers, not fighters. But this This felt right, necessary, bigger than just us. Maybe we could finally put an end to her reign of petty terror and restore the friendly neighborhood spirit we'd originally hoped for, the one buried under her rules and her wrath. Days later, we sat on our front porch at sunset, the sky ablaze with orange and pink, a watercolor wash over the mountains. Carol appeared in her driveway, phone in hand, glaring across the street, but not crossing it, her silhouette stark against the fading light. She seemed to be weighing her options, calculating her next move. We sipped our iced tea, pretending not to notice, as a cool breeze stirred the palms and rustled the wind chime, a soft, defiant tinkle. Sophie sprawled at our feet, her golden fur warm against my ankle, oblivious to the standoff. I pictured a future of evenings like this. No knot of anxiety in my gut, just peace, waving at neighbors who'd become friends, hosting barbecues without a shadow lurking over the fence. We weren't there yet, but we'd taken a step, a big one, and that was something. That night, I lay awake beside Jim's steady breathing, letting myself dream of the day Carol's shadow would lift for good. The HOA might strip her power, or she might slink away, defeated by a community that finally said, enough. For the first time since we'd turned that key, I genuinely believed that day would come. And when it did, we'd be here, on our porch, in our home, with Sophie and the grandkids and the life we'd earned, ready to savor every untainted moment.